Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Kenya's cash crunch won't see it default on its debt repayment, says the government, but the crisis has meant that civil servants have not been paid as the country struggles to service huge interest payments. Also, locals speak of the toll of the brutality visited upon the community of Kishishe in eastern DR Congo by M23 militants. The fighters have recently withdrawn from the town where the UN suspects that more than 170 people were massacred. And we hear from some of the young visionaries in the Seychelles coming up with ways to keep the ways of life relied on by island states afloat. Humans have had a devastating impact on the world's oceans, and for many, it's not an exaggeration to say that the threat is existential. But first, Kenya's president insists that despite the country's cash crisis, it is not at risk of defaulting on its debt obligations. However, the government has struggled to pay its workers on time. Some unions have threatened to go on strike over outstanding civil servant salaries. The country's public debt now amounts to about 65% of national revenue. The World Bank's recently warned that sub-Saharan Africa in general faces a looming debt crisis. Well, Ken Gichinga is the chief economist at Mintori Economics in Nairobi. He joins us now. Ken, thanks for speaking to me. First of all, give us a bit of a sense as to how things have gotten quite so bad and why Kenya is facing a cash crunch.
Well, the cash crunch has been caused by the emerging debt priorities that the country has. Government has said that they had to prioritize debt repayments over salaries. And you remember debt has a first charge on the exchequer. What that means is any revenue that's collected by the government, the first priority has to go to the debt holders. So that is the reason that has been provided.
So how significant is this specific struggle to pay civil servants? It's certainly scary and destabilizing for those directly affected, but will there be any wider knock-on effect when it comes to the Kenyan economy?
Absolutely. There'll be some broader repercussions because when you have delayed salaries by civil servants who are a significant part of the formal sector, what happens is you have reduced cash in circulation. What that means is you'll have lower demand for goods and services, and that will mean that businesses will have a very hard time selling products out there, and that could lead to struggling businesses and eventual unemployment.
Now, William Ruto, the president, has said that Kenya will not be defaulting, but neither will it be taking on more debt. So what are the options that you think he should or could realistically be considering in trying to find a way out of this?
Well, I think there are three solutions to this. I think first, you want to look on the expenditure side, and you want to reduce any wastage, any unnecessary spending. There's still some element of unnecessary spending. Number two, you want to look at the revenue collection. Kenya's tax revenue is normally about 17% of GDP. That's very low compared to countries such as Denmark that is about 34% of GDP. So they need to change our tax policies, make it more progressive, and be able to raise more revenue. And lastly, they might need to consider a bit of deficit financing, which really means printing some money and injecting it into the system to safeguard businesses.
Now, we heard some warnings not that long ago that the debt crisis actually affects the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa. How so?
Well, at the advent of the COVID pandemic, obviously businesses were shut down due to the COVID restrictions. Obviously, what happened was the tax revenues that governments were used to collecting weren't coming as expected. So governments had to borrow much more to be able to fill those voids, as well as to provide COVID support. Now, in countries such as Kenya, that's elongated a bit because we had a general election last year, which also caused a bit of economic slowdown. So these are the things that are coming back where you have a very subdued business environment. So taxes aren't coming as expected, and governments are forced to borrow much, much more.
Thank you so much, Ken Gichinga there, the chief economist at Mentoria Economics in Nairobi. Now, UN Chief Antonio Guterres visited Mogadishu on Tuesday and called for a massive international push to support Somalia as it battles the devastating effects of climate change and a prolonged Islamist insurgency. The Secretary General warned that the threat of drought affects over 8 million people and has taken the country to the brink of famine. Most of Mogadishu was locked down for Guterres' visit, including limitations on public transport. Mogadishu's often been targeted in attacks by al-Shabaab Islamist extremists. Now, in eastern DR Congo, M23 rebels who've terrorised communities there since a resurgence in attacks last year have finally been pulling back from seized villages as part of a withdrawal deal with the government. But their exit is not always the end. Returning residents in Kishishe have been coming to terms with the brutality of the militants whilst they held the town. There last November, the UN reckons that at least 170 civilians were killed. Laurent Berstecker tells us more.
On November 29, 2022, a group of M23 rebels was searching for local militiamen when it descended on Kishishe. It was the start of a manhunt, culminating in one of the worst massacres since the start of the insurrection. 4 months later, the few who survived have agreed to tell their story.
The M23 rounded up all the men and said they belonged to a militia that attacked them. Then they told everyone to sit down and form a circle around a pit. And they started shooting them, one by one.
Nearly all the men were executed on the spot. The rest were forced to dig graves at gunpoint and to bury their dead. The killings marked the start of a months-long occupation by the M23, of which the town still bears the scars. Amid the trenches and fortified positions erected around Kishishe, the roads remained littered with corpses. And the local school, which was used as a base of operation by the rebels, has been closed for months.
Today, children are misbehaving because they can no longer go to school. And our community does not have the means to rebuild it.
Since the M23 withdrew earlier this month, life has slowly begun to return to Kishishe. But without the presence of the Congolese army or of UN peacekeepers to fill the security vacuum, traumatized residents are, for now, left to fend for themselves.
Now, in Guinea-Bissau, cashew nuts account for more than 90% of all exports and for about a quarter of the country's GDP. But this year, with the harvests already well underway, many farmers are now saying that they are getting a particularly raw deal. Sam Bradpeace explains.
More than half the population of Guinea-Bissau is estimated to work in cashew nut farming. In a bid to boost earnings and the wider economy, the government has set a price tag of 50 cents per kilo of cashew nuts sold. But in local markets, this official price tag is often ignored, and farmers find, much to their distaste, that they're often forced to sell for a lower price, somewhere in the region of 40 cents per kilo.
I'm not even going to sell my nuts, even if my family and I will die of hunger. The government fixed a price, but the buyers want to impose a different price of just 250 francs to make money off our hard work. I can't accept that.
Buyers, on the other hand, argue that they can't afford to pay much more.
We're aware that the government fixed the price at 375 francs, but I'm just following orders from my boss when it comes to negotiating on the ground, considering the cost of doing business.
A global slump in cashew nut prices hit Guinea-Bissau hard last year. The government is going to have to work to find some kind of compromise, or it risks being damaged at the legislative elections in June.
Sam Bradpeace there for us. Now, overfishing, global warming and plastic pollution are having a devastating impact on the world's oceans. Researchers warn that marine ecosystems could almost completely collapse within just 25 years. Our correspondent headed to the Seychelles to meet with some young entrepreneurs there, dreaming of ways to water down the damage already done.
Johan, a 20-year-old Mauritian entrepreneur, has just a couple of minutes to pitch his idea to a group of officials. But he's not in the least bit nervous.
I feel like I'm in The Voice. So what do we offer at Sea Life? Put simply, we gather seaweed in an eco-friendly way and then transform it into agricultural products.
Johan's smooth delivery has been honed through training workshops, where he also learned how to raise financing and measure the impact of his initiative. He is among some 100 people taking part at the first ever regional forum for youth entrepreneurship in the blue economy, a platform set up by the International Organization of La Francophonie, which aims to support entrepreneurs working in the sector. Abidat, who makes fertilizer from natural waste, is another keen participant.
I had an innovative project, but I couldn't reach the market. I couldn't picture who my target client was. And thanks to this forum, I now have the tools to be able to sell and put myself out there.
The forum has helped Andre to get over his fear of pitching in French. The 30-year-old from the Seychelles has been working on a new social network called Hyperwave for almost a year. The platform doubles as a hub for those looking to invest in clean oceans.
Social networks are catalysts of change and with the capacity of bringing people together. So why not use them to help the ocean?
His pitch went down well. Hyperwave was selected among the 10 best projects at the forum, winning a €5,000 grant and a 6-month mentorship. But the work is not over yet. It is difficult to access loans and subsidies in the Seychelles because of a complicated maze of bureaucracy. Even more challenging is the fact that industrial fishing represents more than 20% of the archipelago's GDP.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. See you again. Take care.